Here's what's coming up on the world today. Tropical storm Nicholas brings heavy rain to Texas and Louisiana. The EU says it has no option but to talk to the Taliban. And the UK is set to begin administering booster jabs for people over 50 and vulnerable adults. A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani here in Lagos. It's been hours since Tropical Storm Nicholas made landfall on the Texas coast in the United States, having been downgraded from a hurricane, no less, bringing with it heavy rains and risk of life-threatening flooding. Nicholas was upgraded to a hurricane after reaching land very early this morning, but has now weakened to a tropical storm. It comes just weeks after Hurricane Ida, the fifth strongest to ever hit the United States mainland, killing dozens and leaving more than 1 million residents in Louisiana without power, hit. The U.S. National Hurricane Center says Nicholas continues to move slowly inland and has weakened during the past few hours, but warns about life-threatening flash flooding impacts, especially in highly urbanized metropolitan areas. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards wants no one to be caught off guard by the storm and warns the drainage system still clogged from Ida could trigger flash floods. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has declared state of emergency in 17 counties and in 3 cities. U.S. President Joe Biden has been out in California campaigning with State Governor Gavin Newsom as he seeks another term in office. But the president took some time to address climate change, saying recent changes are stark and must be addressed. On Monday, he raised alarm about wildfires raging through California and their relation to climate change, describing them as a blinking code red for the country.
But we can't ignore the reality that these wildfires are being supercharged by climate change. And we just surveyed some of the damage of the Calder fire here in California, which in less than a month has wiped out for 200,000 acres and 1,000 structures. Homes, precious memories destroyed, air quality degraded, local economy stopped in its tracks, and nearly 200 people in the area forced to live in shelters. We are going to beat this climate change.
Channels Television's Washington correspondent Maria Bird has more for us. Maria, do paint the picture for us. What's been going on in Texas and Louisiana, at least in the last couple of hours.
Yes, well, Texas and Louisiana are definitely being hit, but it's a Category 1 hurricane that hit the eastern shore of Texas. And so the expectations is that you won't have the same type of traumatic taking down of buildings and some of the devastation that happened in that area. The issue is going to be the flooding, which we know continues to be a great challenge in the U.S., whether you're in the southern regions of the U.S. or in the eastern and northeastern regions of the U.S. And so that continues to be the greatest concern at this time for those in Texas and also in Louisiana. It's expected that Louisiana will definitely be hitting some of this later on this evening into Wednesday is when they will really see the heavy rains that are expected.
Well, I know Storm Nicholas probably hit before President Biden arrived and gave his address on climate change in California, but surely he has addressed the storm and the impacts. He already attributes recent wildfires raging as stark evidence of climate change. But with so much talk already about climate change, what is this administration's response to the glaring evidence, and do they have any near future plans?
Climate change is something that has been a conversation in the U.S. for, I would say, decades now. But we know now more than ever before that it is critical that climate change is addressed. If you really look at the infrastructure bill that has been brought forth, many of the things that are there to address what's called the infrastructure will also address some of the issues regarding climate change. Now, those are more reactive plans and obviously things are going to be putting in place. But at the same time, they will begin to build an infrastructure that should be able to address and potentially lessen some of the global climate change impacts that we see, and also some of the pollution and some of the very detrimental ways in which especially Americans are living out their lives. If you think about, emissions from gasoline, from cars, moving more to electric cars, moving more to factories that are able to function on solar capacity. So those infrastructure things are going to obviously impact the actual global climate issues that you hear President Biden discussing.
Let's segue into the reason why the president is in California, which is the elections coming up, the governorship elections coming up with Gavin Newsom seeking another term. Talk to us about the campaigns which are in the last leg. What's been going on?
The campaigns have been obviously very fierce over the last couple of weeks. We know that the radio host Larry Elder is going against Governor Newsom. It is expected that we should not see a recall, but they're saying don't be too quick to assume that, because we know that right now, with President Biden losing some of his steam, losing some of his support, we know that that does put many Democrats at risk, especially in the state of California, where we know that has typically been a very Democratic state. But we also know there's various other factors that could potentially impact, and that even gave Larry Elder the position to even potentially be a candidate for the recall of this election.
Maria, thanks again for keeping us updated, and we'll be reaching out to you for more on developments in Texas and in Louisiana.
Thank you.
We just talked about elections in California, but speaking of elections, they're just 2 weeks away in Germany. It will be challenging for those in areas hit by the worst natural disaster 2 months ago, where many parts were hit by raging floods, killing at least 180 people. Also, hundreds of homes were destroyed, roads, railway lines, and bridges washed away. Many areas, one of them Germany's Aachen Valley, is still lacking vital infrastructure, and life is anything but normal. Elections, however, must go on. Government officials have been setting up tents, however, for residents to participate in the election. Elections hold on September 26th to elect the members of the 20th Bundestag. State elections in Berlin and Mecklenburg-Vorpommern will also be held. Incumbent Chancellor Angela Merkel will not run in this election, marking the end of her almost 16-year chancellorship. It marks the first time in post-war history that the incumbent chancellor is not seeking re-election. The Taliban's new government is barely 2 weeks old, and countries and organizations still trying to work around how to relate with the government without acknowledging it. The European Union has decided, however, it has no option but to talk to the new rulers, and that Brussels will try to coordinate with member governments to organize a diplomatic presence in Kabul. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, pointed this out to the European Parliament in Strasbourg today. EU foreign ministers have set conditions for re-establishing humanitarian aid and diplomatic ties with the Taliban, who took control of Afghanistan on August 15th, including respect for human rights, particularly women's rights.
To have any chance of influencing events, we have no other options but to engage with the Taliban. Engaging doesn't mean recognition. Not. But engaging means talking, discussing, and agreeing when possible. With the ministers at the Council, we agreed that the level and nature of this engagement will depend on the actions of the new government. We are considering an European Union presence in Kabul, coordinated by the External Action Service. In fact, our delegation there has never been closed. The embassies of the member states have been closed and they are not going to reopen, but we still have a delegation that can be, since it's not an embassy, since we are not a state, can be used as an anthem if the security conditions are met, in order to discuss with the government in a closer way than through video conference or through messages.
foreign policy commentator Collins Weke joins us now from Brussels. Collins, great to see you as always. It would be an interesting dance, wouldn't it? Watching the EU and other countries try to maneuver relating with the Taliban while not acknowledging it. So how do you relate with a government without giving it full recognition?
A tough one, Amarachi, if you ask me. The only way you can describe it is a marriage of convenience or an arranged marriage. Essentially, what we expect to play out is a relationship based on mutual interest. Okay, now you relate with somebody, or in this case, country to country or block to block, not because you agree on everything, but because not relating actually portends disaster for both countries. In the case of the EU, they appear to have a lot more to lose by not relating with Afghanistan, under the Taliban, than Afghanistan itself, even though they need all the foreign aids that they can get. Now, let's look at two cardinal areas that the EU is very, very much anxious about. One is using Afghanistan as a hub for international terrorism. Now, not being on the dining table means that you are on the menu. That is the reasoning of the EU in this instance. So they felt, well, if we have a presence there, you should not forget one thing. Listening very, very carefully to the, some of the diplomatic words that Mr. Borrell used, he said, it is not going to be an embassy because the EU is not a country. So it's going to be a representative office. And the individual countries of the EU are certainly not going to have an embassy there. So that's on one hand. And then the issue of migration, there is going to be a serious migratory, disaster if there is no presence of the EU talking to them and trying to avert that, disaster. So this is all in the national interest of the EU for them to engage, even when there is no full diplomatic, relations.
Yeah, and I think that's the main concern, for many European countries, the issue of refugees, resettlement, how to go about taking care of them. Just yesterday, the UN called for $600 million in aid to deal with the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Member countries, countries around the world pledged over $1 billion. But realistically, how much do you reckon could be put together to meet immediate needs on the ground?
Oh, I really have to have the crystal ball to be able to make such estimates. But let's start with the knowns. One of the knowns is that prior to the UN estimates, the EU had actually estimated a budget of 300 million, to be able to intervene for 2021 and another 300 million for 2022. That is already 50% of the UN estimate. By all standards, that's not a bad idea. But, of course, there are some caveats. Because you will understand one thing. The EU no longer has, they never had the hard power by way of, the military might, a common military might. So what the EU has is a soft power by way of, supporting education, the rights of women and girls, and so on and so forth, as a way of maintaining their global, diplomatic, standing. Now, not intervening and not doing what they ought to do means that they stand a very, very real chance of losing even that soft power which they currently have under a theocratic Taliban government. So what I believe that is going to happen is that The EU contributing its own 300 million, which is half of the estimate. They will do everything they can to influence others to actually meet them up. So the 600 million that the UN estimated is almost certain, to be on the table as quickly as possible. Yeah. And I believe, that will make a good start for the Taliban in, meeting immediate needs.
Yeah, and interestingly, there are needs all over the world. Collins Wicke, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for joining me on The World Today.
Always a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We have more stories coming up on The World Today. Plus, cows are being toilet trained to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Find out how. Once again. Welcome back. And apparently major elections are taking place across Europe today. Norway's centre-left opposition parties are on course to win a majority in parliament after Monday's election and will now negotiate how to form a coalition, with climate change and a widening wealth gap expected to be central to discussions. Labour Party leader Jonas Gahr Støre says he intends to form the next government after 97.5% of the votes had been counted. Labour and 4 other centre-left parties could swing to a combined majority of 100 seats, up from 81 currently, according to the Directorate of Elections. A minimum of 85 seats, however, is required to win a majority in the 169-seat parliament. Pope Francis says the cross should not be used for politics, warning against Christians trying to be triumphalists and an apparent criticism of the use of religion for partisan purposes. The Pope's comments come on the second day of his visit to Slovakia. Pope Francis flew from the capital Bratislava to eastern Slovak city of Prešov, where he presided at a long service known as a Divine Liturgy, a Byzantine rite used by Eastern Catholic and Orthodox churches. He wove his homily around the theme of Christian identity and crosses and crucifixes, saying that they were often used superficially. He told around 30,000 worshippers that Christians had crucifixes or crosses around their necks or on walls in their homes, but had no relationship with Jesus Christ. Back in Northern America, Canada now, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's ruling Liberals have recovered from early setbacks and could eke out another minority government in a snap September 20 election he called to gain approval for how he handled the coronavirus pandemic. Organizers of previous demonstrations against vaccine mandates promised to mobilize again across Canada on Monday. Trudeau says Conservative Party leader Erin O'Toole is giving in to anti-vaccination advocates. In August, the network that operates several hospitals in Toronto said it would sack any staff member who is not fully vaccinated by the end of October. University Health Network, which includes the Toronto General Hospital and the Princess Margaret's Cancer Centre, says employees who are not vaccinated by October 8th will be placed on unpaid leave for 2 weeks. It will then be terminated if the vaccination status does not change by the end of the month.
That's what Canadians do. We stick up for each other. We stick up for the most vulnerable, and we stick up for those caring for our most vulnerable. So this morning I'm announcing that the Liberal Party of Canada, if re-elected to form government, will make it a criminal offence to block access to buildings that provide health care, whether that's hospitals, clinics, abortion clinics, pharmacies, testing centres. It is not okay that across the country, hospitals are having to put up barricades today to manage the mobs coming their way.
Staying with the pandemic, the UK government has announced its COVID-19 autumn and winter plan, with the Health Secretary Sajid Javid saying from next week, around 30 million people, including those over 50, younger adults with health conditions and frontline health and social workers will be offered a third dose of COVID vaccines. There's more in the Global Update.
Secretary of State.
Britain's Health Minister, Sajid Javid, says the government has accepted a recommendation from health officials that COVID-19 vaccine booster shots should be given to all vulnerable people and those aged over 50.
Nobody needs to come forward at this point.
The announcement came as he set out to Parliament a plan B for dealing with the virus if the situation worsens. More than 80% of British adults have had both doses of the vaccine, but with restrictions eased, new daily infection numbers are regularly running at more than 30,000.
I can confirm that I have accepted the JCVI's advice and that the NHS is preparing to offer booster doses from next week. The NHS will contact people at the right time, and nobody needs to come forward at this point. This booster programme, it will protect the most vulnerable through the winter months and strengthen our wall of defence even further.
An outbreak of the Delta variant of COVID-19 that is thought to have begun in a primary school in Putian in China's southeast continues to grow, prompting authorities to impose measures, including travel restrictions and school closures, to curb the spread of the virus. Putian, a city of 3.2 million in coastal Fujian province, has ordered the testing of all residents after cases linked to a man who returned from Singapore ballooned into a province-wide outbreak of more than 100 people.
We need to have somebody.
The Indonesian health minister says the country will consider reopening its border to the world after at least 70% of its targeting population received the first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine.
So now we have 74 million. We will hit 140 roughly and on the paper. So after that, then we can gradually open, and hopefully if we can get 70% second dose of the target populations, hopefully is between February or March, that it should be, we are more relaxed.
Over 4 million COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Indonesia, making it one of the worst-hit Asia countries by the pandemic. But cases in the biggest Southeast Asian nation of 270 million people have declined significantly in the past month after peaking in mid-July. And finally, in Russia, President Vladimir Putin is self-isolating after coronavirus cases emerged in his inner circle. He has cancelled plans to appear in person at a regional summit in Tajikistan later in the week.
In Malaysia, however, entertainer Shahrul Hissam Baharuddin has found a new way of using his skills in disinfecting people's homes while dressed up as a clown. For months in 2020, Shahrul saw his income as an entertainer dry up, especially after lockdown, but put a stop to large parties and gatherings. Since then, he's adapted his smoke machine as a disinfection device while entertaining children in households. Shahrul says the emphasis is more about trying to create a fun atmosphere different from others. He provides some entertainment, not just for the kids indoors, but for the adults too. As we end the program, cows' droppings can become a problem, especially if they're household installs where urine and feces mix. This produces ammonia, an indirect greenhouse gas. In a recent study, researchers at the Institute of Behavioral Physiology at the FBN in Germany, the FLI for Animal Welfare and Husbandry in Cell, Germany, and the University of Auckland, New Zealand, showed how cows can be trained to pass their urine only in certain places in the barn. In other words, the cattle can be trained to use the moo loo. In this way, the excreta can be collected and treated, and most importantly, emissions can be reduced. Cattle, like many other animals or farm animals, are quite intelligent and capable of learning. So why shouldn't they also be able to learn how to use a toilet? Interesting. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.